Remember Pebble watches? The pioneer of smartwatches with a few of the biggest Kickstarter campaigns totaling up over $40 million? Their classic smartwatches dominated the arena for several years, but in just a short year, they went from market leader to try and sell themselves. So what happened? Make sure to stick around till the end to find out. Welcome to Hari's Hobbies. Pebble got off to a great start in 2012 with the biggest Kickstarter campaign of all time, raising over $10.2 million. They entered the scene with confidence and with pretty deep wallets. The original Pebble launched in 2013 and it was welcomed with some great reviews. This was really the first attempt at a modern smartwatch, and Pebble proved that there was a lot of interest for wearable technology and gadgets. The first Pebble watch was pretty rudimentary. It would give you things such as notifications, text alerts, calendar alerts, and of course, the time. It was capable of running some light apps such as ESPN and Evernote. Soon enough, the Pebble Time came out, and with this watch, Pebble took a completely new approach on the operating system. This watch had an even bigger Kickstarter with the biggest Kickstarter of all time to this date of over $20.3 million. Their slogan was, "Awesome software, no compromises." But even right here in the very early stages, there were some signs of the company heading in the wrong direction. The biggest red flag was the fact that they had to return to Kickstarter in order to raise more money. Why were they not able to get money from private investment firms? What issue did these top-level investors see in this company? Despite these early signs of a big looming issue, Pebble completely ignored these signs and continued moving forward. And soon enough, there was an even bigger issue. The most anticipated watch from the biggest tech company of the world, Apple, came out in 2015. But Pebble blatantly ignored this release and they were, quote, unfazed by the release. They did not think that this would cut into any of their sales, and they actually thought it would improve the sales. And they were initially right. There was more interest in the Pebble watches as a cheaper alternative to the Apple Watch. And a lot of people even preferred Pebble watches due to their simplicity. If Pebble really started a market right now and made a clear purpose for themselves, they probably could have survived the disaster. But unfortunately, they didn't do that. And you have to keep in mind that Apple is a lifestyle brand. While some people did prefer the Pebble watch for simplicity, most people prefer the Apple Watch. Pebble was simply the cheaper alternative, and that's why many people turned to it, but Apple Watch was actually the preferred product. It's like Toyota in the car market. No one really exactly wants a Toyota Camry, but it makes the most sense to buy. People definitely prefer other manufacturers like Mercedes-Benz and Audi or BMW. But that didn't stop Toyota from creating a Camry that is the best-selling sedan in all of America for several years now. It's because they had a clear purpose that drove all of their sales. They made reliable, affordable family vehicles. And that clarity is what Pebble was lacking. To make matters even worse, Pebble was fighting against social views. Apple Watch was the classy fitness watch, while Pebble was the geeky watch. And eventually, sales started to shrink for Pebble, and an insider stated that Apple simply took up all of the auction that was available. They clearly underestimated Apple, who had a very strong brand name and decades of product building knowledge. Further issues arose as they had difficulty paying their suppliers in Taiwan. Throughout 2015, Pebble had several payment issues and they had several outstanding notices. Whenever their suppliers would call for payments, Pebble wouldn't even reply in several cases. This is very unprofessional of Pebble and shows how bad their management was, and this really hurts their reputation as well. These payments were still unpaid even a year later when Fitbit entered into acquisition talks with Pebble. The issues that Pebble had to deal with simply kept piling on top of each other, and they simply kept ignoring all of them. To make matters even worse, there was favoritism within the supply team. They preferred Quanta Computer to Compal Electronics, and this really led to bad relations with their suppliers. And as a result, they once again had to return to Kickstarter to raise money for their new products. While they did extremely well on Kickstarter once again, these funds were simply not sufficient to develop products that are on par with corporate magnates like Apple. From here on out, the company really started to fall apart. And then, soon enough, Black Friday and Cyber Monday of 2015 rolled around, and the sales were actually lower than the previous year. This was absolutely terrible news for the company. They weren't even able to surpass their own previous sales. This is when they finally realized that the company was going in the wrong direction and something had to be done very quickly. They finally started to talk about making change to the company, but by this point it was already too late. In March of 2016, they had to lay off 25% of their staff. Furthermore, they started to compile sales data, and workers and the public started to speculate that Pebble was trying to sell themselves. The rumors and theories were confirmed when Eric admitted to trying to sell the company, but unfortunately the deal failed. He was trying to close a deal with Intel for $70 million, but the Intel CEO just felt that something was wrong with the company and was not comfortable closing the deal. At this point, they were into complete recovery and they were trying to form a deal with the watch giant Citizen. They started to collaborate with Citizen in an effort to create the Time Round. They were trying to develop their first circular watch, but there was clearly issues with the collaboration. Citizen had pretty long developing times, usually lasting over a year, and their designs were chunky and big. As a result, Pebble ended up settling on one of their own designs and ended up paying $50,000 to Citizen for their work. Rumors started floating around that Pebble paid Citizen this money with the knowledge of a potential deal. Apparently, Citizen was considering a $740 million acquisition of Pebble, which is upwards of $1 billion and over 10 times what the Intel CEO thought Pebble was worth. But clearly, this deal never went through, and Citizen claims that these were false rumors that were passed on to TechCrunch and that they were never even considering buying the company. Pebble actually offered their employees two options. They can cut losses and leave and receive a severance package, or they can keep their shares and stay, and eventually their shares will be doubled. Some took the buyout offer, but most still had some last hope for the Pebble Time 2 and the Pebble Core, which they thought would reinvigorate sales. These two products were on track for launch at the beginning of 2017, and even a week before the Fitbit discussion started, they were visiting manufacturing plants in Asia for these two products. But, as the CEO admits, they had trouble raising money. Private equity funds and investment groups were simply not interested in investing in Pebble. They were simply out of time and money as banks started to call in their loans as they were unconvinced that Pebble would be able to raise funding or sell enough products to make up for the loan. It was the end of the line. Eric knew that it was all but over, and one honorable thing that he did was that he wanted a buyer who would respect the Kickstarter consumers. Fitbit was the only buyer who was willing to abide by these guidelines. It was thought that Fitbit was going to acquire all or most of Pebble, including all of their staff. But as discussions progressed, it was clear that Fitbit was really only interested in the software side of Pebble and not the hardware side. This was mainly because Fitbit had their own issues to deal with. Their stock price was almost up to $50 at their very peak, and now it was less than $10 a share. I'm not even sure why they decided to acquire a part of Pebble, especially in this condition, but in the end, they did acquire the software side of Pebble. But unfortunately, the hardware team was neglected, and most of them were sent home with severance packages. And CEO Eric went over to work at the startup incubator Y Combinator, and at this point, it was all over. Throughout this whole disaster from beginning to end, there was one underlying issue that persisted throughout the whole time, which was terrible management. They had a huge tendency to just simply ignore problems instead of dealing with them and solving them. From failing to attract investors to not paying suppliers to ignoring competition. All of these issues were faced with ignorance instead of care. They didn't think why investors thought twice before investing in a company that was clearly so loved by the public. They didn't think about how to pay suppliers on time. And they didn't think about how they would convey a clear purpose to the public when the biggest company in the world was coming to compete with them. While their ideas and concepts were great, these issues plagued the company and were probably apparent to potential investors. They were almost overconfident that they were the pioneers and that all the customers would stay with them despite growing competition from the biggest company in the world. They clearly didn't look at the several companies that were much bigger than them and then went to dust. Like Compaq, AOL, Sears, Kmart, and Toys R Us. In the end, Pebble really was a great company that started with good intentions, an amazing idea, and extraordinary welcoming support. But all of this paled and became meaningless in the face of bad management and looming competition. Pebble could still be around as a great cheap alternative tending to the masses. But unfortunately, they never really made their purpose clear, and eventually consumers simply forgot and moved on. This is truly a sad ending to a spectacular start. But that's all I have for you guys on the decline of Pebble. Make sure to comment down below what company you would like me to cover next. Also, if you guys like this video, then make sure to drop a like and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more videos just like this one. But until then, I'm Harry, and I'll see you guys on the next one.